Dagjuffar spel. Håll i din tunna stjärna fläder. La linjen si. Glida ner. Sommar djupa. Din unga formless saknar ner. Förhållas vid sidan en gånga tid. Nion anima den gäller.
Hello my good friends, how are you? I'm Ari Thurger and today I'm going to talk about Odin's cloak, as it is mentioned in the sources. The relation between color and the religious life. There are colors that represent, well, something in general in the religious mind of Indo-European peoples. For instance, black represents the European soils and therefore it is the color of fertility, while white represents death, and in many cases of prehistoric engravings on stone using the color white depicts motifs of the afterlife and the supernatural linked to the spiritual world and magical religious ceremonies and rituals related to that same spiritual world. But there are specific colors linked to a particular deity and that deity's field of expertise, so to speak. That's exactly what I'm going to talk about today. The color of Odin's cloak. This video might contain a certain mind image that might not be appropriate for a more sensitive audience, but I think it might prove to be useful in a certain way. Also, this video wasn't a request by any of my patrons, but I would like to dedicate this video to one of my patrons, Mr. Mark Eckenroe, who is a paramedic and deals with death on a regular basis. I am an archaeologist and 90% of my work is with the dead and their bones, but they have been dead for quite some time. But Mr. Mark deals with people who are still alive, and some of them die right there, and that's quite different. So I would like to dedicate this video to him in appreciation for the work he does, saving lives, and for some people he is the last person they see before departing. And obviously I want to dedicate this video to all the paramedics out there for their bravery. As you know, the religious image of Odin being the All-Father and King of the Gods, ruler of Asgard, the divine realm, is somewhat a late medieval creation. His cult progressively increased in popularity among the nobility, which is why this deity eventually became regarded as a chieftain, a ruler deity, progressively ascending in the divine hierarchy to accompany the political and religious reality of medieval Scandinavia. Odin has been regarded as the god of death and inspiration for many centuries, way before having the importance it is given to him nowadays, precisely due to medieval Icelandic sources that turned him into the All-Father. And during the Viking period, he was still very much the god of death and inspiration. One of the elements that distinguishes this god from others and gives us indications of his connection with death is the cloak he wears. Odin's clothing vary from source to source, or the descriptions are vague, but what remains consistent is the color of his cloak, which is blår, a dark blue or corpse blue. It is the color that either indicates death or killing, and it is the most noticeable piece of clothing of the Norse god of death. In Old Norse poetry, the dead are often described as either being blår, blue, or dokra, which is dark and not black. So in general, the dead have a dark blue hue or shade. Throughout Old Norse poetry and Icelandic sagas, and Icelandic necromantic practices and myth and folklore concerning the dead and the draugr, etc., there are always very detailed descriptions of what the body looks like, the corpse, and what it does and what happens in advanced stages of putrefaction. The color blue is always present. This gives us the idea that during these periods it was quite common for people to be in contact and in close proximity with dead bodies for long periods during the various stages of decomposition. Nothing of the sort happens nowadays, obviously. When a person dies, after the pale waxy look, a yellow woo starts to settle in, and that's about the extent people are in contact with a dead body. So, by the Old Norse sources, we understand people were in contact with dead bodies for a very long period, to the point of advanced stages of decay, which confirms certain historical sources that tells us about the funerary rites during the Viking period. For instance, Ibn Fadlan in the early 10th century met the people known as Rus by the Bulgar trading post somewhere along the Volga River in nowadays Russia. He witnessed firsthand the funeral of one of the Rus men who held a certain social status among that merchant community. For 10 days, the body was placed in a wooden chamber, while garments were being made to dress the deceased, newly made garments just for the occasion. Now, I'm not going into details on this video, but the funerary ceremony and ritual took more than a week. So it was quite normal for these people to extend the funerary ceremonies, giving time to adjust and properly saying goodbye. So it's quite normal. They knew exactly what a dead person would look like and what happened to the body. Now, just think about it. Obviously, nowadays, it's a question of health, quickly preparing a dead person to be buried or cremated. But I cannot help to think that it all happened so quickly, and there isn't a chance to properly say goodbye and adjust to the reality. And most people don't even get to see the dead body of the person they once loved, and all of a sudden, it's all gone. There isn't a proper closure, a proper goodbye. There isn't the chance of letting that sink in and accept. The person is quickly placed on a casket and it's all gone. People don't get to see certain parts of life itself, the decaying of all things, the ugliness of the natural processes of life. And I think that's one of the reasons that makes us so fearful of death and causes panic and anxiety to think about what happens to the body in the future. We have lost this proximity with death, and not having that contact with it, it's one of the main reasons we do not accept the natural cycle of life and all things. But to the people of the past, it was quite normal, and they got used to be in contact with the dead, which is why I think people of the past did not fear death, because they knew it was just a natural cycle of life, and they accepted both the beauty and the ugliness of life. They accepted fate. Their funerary ceremonies took days, and I think that gave us a certain sense of security and adaptation to the new reality, because they had time to properly say goodbye and share the moment with the family and the community. And they had time to even prepare the crossing into the afterlife and accept all that as just a normal stage of life. So, as previously said, the Cloak of Odin is described as being blår, blue or dark blue. Well, after death, body extremities will naturally turn blue within 8 to 12 hours without intervention. And after 24 hours, this blue color continues to spread to the rest of the body. In advanced stages of decay, the blue color will become darker. And I cannot help to think this may be one of the reasons why the Norse goddess Hel is regarded as being dark of skin. Her representation of being half flesh and half rotten, half white and half black, is a later Christian adaptation to the Norse myths. Hel is regarded as being dark of skin. In fact, the term Helblor comes in the sources to describe the color of death, that is, the blue of hell. So she is dark blue, or a darker shade of blue, because she represents advanced stages of decaying, which means she was the goddess that took the dead when they were ready to go into the underworld. Let me explain. As we have seen before, during the Viking period, funerary ceremonies took days. And by the end of the ceremonies, the bodies, the corpses, would be quite dark. And that was exactly when they were ready to be placed in the earth or being cremated. In a religious perception, they were ready to cross over. That's when the goddess of the underworld would take them, when they were quite dark of skin. But when it comes to Odin, his cloak isn't Helblor, hell blue, or Dokreblaur, dark blue. The cloak of Odin is simply blue, which may be a reference to the color that starts to settle in on the corpse in the earlier stages of death, which might be a reference that Odin is the god that provides death, or is the god that might have been called upon right after a person would die. Odin is death itself, while Hel is the keeper of the dead, which is quite different. Odin is the god of the funerary ceremonies, while Hel is the final stage of the funerary ceremonies. So bear it with me now. Odin is the giver of death, and Hel is the one that takes the dead into the afterlife or the underworld after all the preparations to let the dead go. This religious understanding might be what gave origins to the myth in Gylfaginning, in the Prose Edda, where Hel, the goddess, is described as having been appointed by the god Odin as ruler of a realm of the same name, where the dead would go. So, in Norse mythology, Odin is the true god of death. Odin isn't the god that takes the dead. Odin is the god that gives death. The gift of death is with Odin, while Hel is the goddess that accepts the dead. She is the goddess of the underworld and keeper of the dead, but not the one that gives death. Death is solely a gift of Odin. Odin is the god of death, but he needs someone to take care of the land of the dead and take care of the dead themselves. So he points Hel to the job. This might make a better sense if we remember that Hel, much like every other underworld goddess, in prehistoric religious and spiritual beliefs and understandings, was a goddess of the very earth beneath our feet. An earth goddess, a female figure that in her womb she continues to protect her children. She continues to protect people, her children, even after death. Hel is the prehistoric earth mother, caring mother, that in her earthly womb, in the underworld, protects and keeps the souls of the dead. And haven't I said in the beginning of this video that the color black, or the dark color of the earth, to Indo-Europeans was the color of fertility? Hel is dark of color, not only because of the color of corpses in advanced stages of decay, but because she is the earth. She is the dark womb of the earth, the primordial cave, the underworld, the underground. And in many prehistoric and protohistoric religious beliefs, the dead are intimately tied with fertility. And such beliefs were carried up until the Iron Age and early medieval times. The cult of the ancestors and the ceremonies held in the burial mounds, and the dead becoming Alfar, elves, spiritual entities of the natural world that have a direct influence upon the earth and the fertility of the grounds. So a great portion of the cult of the ancestors is to ask the ancestors to help in the fertility of the soils. So Hel is the goddess of the underworld, the goddess of the earth, protector of the dead. And the dead propitiate fertility because the dead would go to the earth and not some faraway realm. To pagan standards, the underworld was the earth beneath our feet. Underworld gods are not gods underneath, are gods underneath the earth and not hellish entities portrayed by the church. Hel, in a more prehistoric past, was a goddess of both the underworld and fertility, just like the Greek Persephone, goddess of the underworld and fertility. And Hecate, in her origins, was a goddess of fertility as well, and then became goddess of the underworld. And Cybele, and a whole variety of earth goddesses who have this apparent motif of being caring mothers who still protect their children after death, in the womb of the earth, in the underworld, the underground. So Odin is the true Norse god of death. He is the one that provides death, because a caring mother will not give death to the children she loves, but someone must provide death. In the Germanic and Norse pantheon, it was Odin that held the true gift of death. It is he who wears the mantle of death, the blue cloak. Odin wears the blue cloak, the color of death and decaying of the body. Odin also rides a horse, Sleipnir, and the mythological image of the wild hunt, in which Wodanas, Wade and Odin is the leader, the god in question rides a horse, and the restless dead ride horses following their leader, in this grim twilight cavalcade across the skies. The restless dead follow the god of death in search for those who are marked for death or doomed to die, so they can join the otherworldly procession. As previously mentioned on the video about horses in Norse religion, there is a great emphasis on the horse motif and linked with death and death ceremonies and rituals and with Odin. But it's curious to notice that in the Sami mythology, there is a god named Ruto or Rota, who was a demon of disease. Originally, to the Sami, Ruto was a demon and not a god. Demon as in a spiritual entity and not the same idea of a demon in Christian mythology. Ruto was a minor demon who brought sickness or illness, the personification of evil to the Sami. Shamans would have to work on the person who had suffered some kind of illness brought by Ruto and try to take the minor demon out of the person, healing rituals to send Ruto away. However, it is curious that Ruto progressively became a god, not only of sickness and disease, but also death. And he started to be portrayed as a god who rides a horse, and started to be portrayed as a god who wears a blue cloak. The Sami, in their early prehistoric culture, did not have a general use of the horse. It wasn't a strong religious motif. The elk was, but not the horse. It's possible that the Sami borrowed religious motifs from their Norse Germanic neighbors, because Ruto starts to ride a horse, starts to wear a blue cloak, and is attended by wolves just like Odin, and Ruto becomes a god of death as well. This seems to be the Sami interpretation of Odin when the cult of Odin was introduced to them, and so Ruto changed, and in the religious indigenous Sami panorama adopted Odin's attributes. In Sami traditional motifs, on the shaman's drum, Ruto starts to appear as a figure sitting on a horse. With the introduction of the cult of Odin to the Sami, Ruto became a sickness or an illness who arrived riding a horse and would enter the person, and when the person was healed, Ruto would ride away on horseback. In the healing rituals, horses were sacrificed to Ruto, and so the sickness would pass into the sacrificed horse and leave the person and go into the horse, and thus the sickness or Ruto himself would ride away and the person was healed. So it's curious to see the Sami interpretation of Odin. Odin was clearly a god of death and wore a blue cloak, and horse sacrifice was typical in the cult of Odin, because horse sacrifice wasn't a thing among the Sami until the cult of Odin was introduced to them. The religious evolution of Ruto among the Sami gives us confirmation of the characteristics of Odin, not only as a god of death, but also characteristics of the ritual of horse sacrifice linked to Odin. And so among the Sami, with the introduction of the cult of Odin, the horse became a feared and detested animal. In great part, mostly because the animal was the preferred form of transportation of their Norse neighbors, who were violent and brought much suffering to the Sami people. And the cult of Odin itself was quite violent, and the horse was the main religious motif of Odin's violent cult. But what marks the difference between Odin and Ruto as gods of death is that Odin is closely related to untimely death caused by war, which then causes restless death to follow Odin in the wild hunt, while Ruto is related to death by illness. And this also demonstrates the warlike cultures of the Germanic and Norse peoples, while the Sami were less prone to conflicts and war didn't seem to play a great role in their religious beliefs. And just to finalize this video, a quick note following this line of thought. In Norse mythology, due to the introduction of Christianity and the Christian failure in understanding certain Norse religious beliefs, Hel, the goddess, was transformed into a goddess of sickness and illness and portrayed as a demon, and thus a ruler of the underworld. The exact same thing happened among the Sami. Later on, with Christian influences, Ruto, being the demon of sickness and illness, became the ruler of Rotaimo, the underworld, where all the evil spirits lived. But originally, Ruto wasn't the ruler of the underworld. Neither was the underworld in Sami folklore a place of evil and down in some dark abyss in the underground. In Sami folklore, the underworld, Rotaimo, was in the bottom of a bottomless lake. Alright, my dear friends, I hope you have enjoyed this video, and if you find the video helpful and if you liked it, please do share. By all means, share it with your friends and everywhere else. That will be of great help. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video, and as always, tack för idag.